Welcome. My name is Maja, and this is my third year studying International Relations at Richmond University in London.
And I'm Dr. Keating. I'm Professor of International Political Economy at the university, and I'm also the head of the Department of Social Sciences.
We've created this short video to give you some real insight into our two programs, International Relations and Political Science. I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions at the end, we'll put some contact details for you. So what are these degrees really about?
So international relations at Richmond is a very broad church. So it's not simply about conflict and security issues, though many students are attracted to that side of international relations, and we make sure that we have lots of courses that cover issues such as conflict, warfare, human rights. Those are all covered, but there's also another dimension to it, where we look at issues like global environmental challenges, global development challenges. So we try to make sure we're covering contemporary international affairs, peace and justice, conflicts like in the Middle East, conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa, the Russia-Ukraine crisis. But at the same time, we look at international institutions, we look at the World Bank, the IMF, the UN system. We look at charities and government development aid. We look at the Paris and Kyoto environmental protocols. So on top of the conflict-related stuff, we do these themes and issues, which are also going to cover democracy and contemporary threats to democracy by populism. At the same time, as you move away from international relations more towards political science, we start looking at policy processes, political ideologies, and other kinds of institutional issues, how governments work, how the European Union works. And so both degrees give you the opportunity to do all three things, but you're going to do more of the themes and issues and conflict stuff in international relations, and more of the themes and issues and policy making and institutional structures in political science. But there's a lot of overlap between the programs. And between all that material, you get a very broad degree which prepares students extremely well for a range of different opportunities that they'll have once they've graduated.
Can you tell me what are the key strengths of these programs?
Okay, so obviously, like all Richmond's programs, there are things that make Richmond a really exciting place to study. So we have small class sizes, all the classes are taught by the professors on the program, so over time you get to build these close relations with the faculty that we have. You'll have an advisor, you have a supervisor for your dissertation, which you write at the end of the program, and we are able to provide a level of one-to-one supervision and interaction which you're unlikely to find at other programs. We can take advantage of London as a campus as well as a location to teach, and that gives us access to international institutions and NGOs and government. We're able to teach one course out of the British Parliament in part. So these are all things that are really advantageous to the program in international relations and political science at Richmond.
Let's dive a bit deeper into what we'll study. What are some of the classes?
Okay, so for example, in the first couple of years of the degree, you would, because the first 2 years, the international relations and political science programs are the same and they differentiate later on. So everyone would take contemporary global issues in the 21st century. And in that, you would be looking at issues like terrorism, including cyber terrorism. You'd be looking at, say, the politics of international sport. You would be looking at human rights issues, contemporary conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine issue. You'd be looking at weapons of mass destruction. You'd be looking at contemporary humanitarian tragedies as they unfold. Let's say that the Syria situation with the earthquake. So, and then you'd be asking yourself, what are the frameworks through which we view and understand those kinds of problems? So you'd be learning the basics of liberal approaches, realist approaches, critical approaches, to these contemporary issues. And so the idea is to give students a very broad introduction to the range of subjects and approaches in international relations. Another course which everyone will take will be Rich World, Poor World. So here we're looking at the developing world. We're looking at why the developing world is in the situation that it is. So we look at the historical legacies of colonization and imperialism. We look at the structures of the state and the relationships between state, citizens, civil society in those kinds of countries. We look at gender and ethnicity issues, population issues. We look at the economic and sociological structures of these poor developing countries and look at the different regions as well. So we look at how, say, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and the Middle East are very different to, let's say, East and Southeast Asia, where you have much more economic growth and development. And there you're kind of giving students both an introduction to the development and environment issues that they'll study in more detail later on in their degree, but you're also being given a very broad introduction to the types of politics that cover the majority of people who live in the world, right? Because there's billions of people in the developing world. And so we're really interested in how they integrate into international relations as well.
I can see there are electives in these degrees, like diplomatic studies. Can you tell me a bit more about these?
Sure. So all the students will have a set of core courses that they have to take in the two programs. And then on top of that, they have choices. Sometimes they also get choices outside of the major, but within the major, whether it's international relations or political science, there's lots to pick from. So an example is diplomatic studies. That's a final year class where students will be able to explore diplomatic practice with a range of diplomatic guests. Recently, the class went to the American Embassy for the day for a trip, but there are lots of opportunities to bring in international diplomats into that class. And when students do assessment in that class, they've been, for the last few years, doing a Twitter exercise where they have to follow diplomats on Twitter and then tweet about those diplomats and then try to get engagement with diplomats and other people who follow them. So it's a kind of really interesting and fun course that shows students the practical side of international relations and political science. But there are a few other electives, obviously, that are interesting as well. One of the most popular is international human rights, where we will be looking at particular campaigns that human rights organizations undertake. And again, the assessment is to kind of do review of campaigns and campaign documentation that international human rights like Amnesty produce. Another optional course that we look at is democracy and its enemies. And here we're talking about the rise of populist parties and how they threaten democracy in a range of different ways. So we can talk about Trump in the United States of America, Bolsonaro. We can talk about Brexit. We can talk about Le Pen. So there's lots of kind of contemporary political issues that students find really exciting. And then we can talk about democracy and democratization and democratic consolidation and the threats that democracies face in a range of different cases and examples. So there are lots of options, and we try to integrate both regional issues to make sure that within those electives that you take, you can talk about Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America as you're interested in it, as well as trying to integrate some of the thematic issues on racism and gender and identity. We try to integrate that material into the elective structure so that students can really write about what they want to write about.
That's good. And how are these classes assessed?
And that's a really good question. Obviously, historically, students wrote lots of essays and sat lots of exams, but we've kind of moved away from that model. So even though students will write essays and learn how to write essays, and we do have some exams, a lot of the assessment has moved towards more practical-oriented assessments. So we have lots of assessment types which I cover under the realm of policy writing. So you're writing reports, you're writing reviews. We do policy briefs where you pick a particular issue and try to write material for a broad audience. In sustainable development, which is the course you're taking with me right now, we do a policy evaluation document where the students pick a sustainable development project in the developing world, and then they write a review of that project using specific evaluation criteria that they have chosen. What are you writing about?
I'm writing about deforestation in Uganda.
Okay, and you would obviously pick some criterion?
Yes, from Bellagio.
From the Bellagio,
Yes,
that's right.
yes,
So
5 of them.
you've got a project from the developing world, you've got your criteria, and then obviously you produce something which reproduces the kinds of writing that people will be doing in the workplace, whether that's in government or business or in the third sector of NGOs and charities. Our assessment is designed to reproduce those kinds of experiences.
And about internships, do you recommend that students do an internship? And if so, what's the best time to do that?
We do think students should do internships. We don't make them do it. If you don't want to, obviously you don't have to, but we do really like it when students do an internship because their experiences are so great. We had a student who interned, this was a while ago, she interned with the Make a Smile Foundation or something like that. And so her job was to source doctor volunteers, fly them out to Africa, book hotel rooms and find surgery spaces for them. And the doctors would then do cleft palate surgery for a few days and then they'd return. And so that was her internship. And she spent 2 months doing that. And at the end of the internship, she graduated and they gave her a job and she spent 10 years doing that here in London. But she's gone back to the States now. But that's an example of how internships give you really practical skill sets that can then lead to work. Now, students love internships. They tend to do really, really well in them. But sometimes we have students whose academic grades aren't so great. And so even though all students do well in internships, it's particularly important for the students who aren't necessarily as academic because it shows that they're in the workplace situation. They can apply the skills they've learned and really excel. Students excel as a rule in these internships. We've had a bunch of students do internships with the third sector. So like the foundation I talked about, NGOs and charities. We have students who've done internships with business as well, and students who've done internships with government, whether that's international institutions, the European Union, the American Congress, the British Parliament, political parties. So a range of really interesting internships. And I think your brother did a cool internship with Tulsi Gabbard in Hawaii when she was running for president, I think. Did he talk about that to you?
Not that much.
No? That's so funny.
Yeah,
but
he
obviously,
himself.
Yeah, that's
He did
right.
enjoy it, though.
He did enjoy it. Yeah, he had a great time. But what they were doing in that internship, because there were 2 students who did it, was they wrote policy briefs for her. So he'd been writing policy briefs as the assessment in the classes. And I think what happens is students get them these internships and they ask them, what can you do? And they say, oh, well, we can write policy briefs. And so then they actually do that in these job situations. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but they did produce some incredible work during that internship. So we're very proud of the link between the preparation work that we do in classes, what students do in the internship, and then how that then leads on to better things for the students. So it works really well.
So after graduation, what do students have gone to do?
In international relations and political science, the majority of students will go on to do a 1-year master's degree. And we have sent them all over the world to do these degrees, all over top universities. Our students tend to excel in these situations. And that's partly because in the American system, you do so many courses and you do so much assessment and there's such breadth. And combined with the kind of one-on-one small class size, our students emerge from this program really just as excellent students. And they do really well in these situations. They specialize then. And often what happens is if you do want to work in international organizations or international development, which a lot of our students end up doing, you're competing with other students who also have master's degrees. So for example, we ask all our students to write an 8,000 word roughly dissertation which we give them weekly one-on-one support sessions for the whole year that they write it. And then when they go to do a master's degree, they get asked to write an 8,000-word master's thesis, and they've basically already written one. And that's one of the reasons why our students do really well in the international postgraduate. And then, of course, that really then helps them move into the workplace in a range of different ways. So we're going to encourage all of our students to go on and get that kind of extra level of qualification, and we prepare them for it. But they don't all do that. Some obviously are going to want to work and then come back and do a professional qualification in 5 or 10 years' time, like an MBA. Some go on to do law, and then that's postgrad law is a very different kind of phenomenon. And others go straight into the workplace in a range of different ways. But we've got students working in government, in the media, in politics directly for political parties of both sides of Parliament or of Congress. And then students also, a lot of students go on and work in charities and NGOs and international institutions. We have quite a few at the moment who are doing women's, like violence against women organisations here in the UK and in Ireland. So we seem to have produced a bunch of students recently who are working in those fields. Many back in the States are working in politics in one way or another. They tend to go in and out of government and the private sector. So we also have a lot of students, for whatever reason, who work for global consultancy firms. And often it's a case that they work, let's say, for KPMG, but they're doing consultancy work with development agencies producing work. And so you see a lot of crossover between business, government, and the charitable sector for our students. Some that work in the media as well. So there's a lot of opportunities for Richmond students out there. And of course, we have a strong alumni network that gives students a really good sense of what kind of opportunities that are made available for them. Most of our alumni say the career trajectories have been fantastic, but they've been zigzaggy. So rather than kind of like one clear direction, there's been kind of, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then eventually they've kind of worked themselves into these positions that they're kind of super happy with. We have one student who is bizarrely enough working in Iraq, in the Kurdish sector of Iraq. She's also worked in Nigeria and Afghanistan. She jokes that her job is to kind of smash through roadblocks in her armoured Humvee. But what she's actually doing is she works for a private company that disburses US aid. And she's the internal audit compliance officer. So when US aid comes to check that the money is being spent on what it's meant to be spent on, she's doing the internal compliance to make sure that they're spending this aid money the way they're supposed to before the government arrives to check them out. And so we've got a bunch of students doing these incredible jobs, only often 5 or 10 years out of graduation. So we graduate them, they do a master's degree, which is usually 1 year in the UK. They get into work, and then 5 or 10 years, we ask them what they're doing, and we're often just blown away by what they're doing and what their achievements have been. It's incredible.
Very exciting. So Richmond offers both the UK and US accreditation. Can you tell me more about this?
So historically, we were a US educational institution that since between 1995, we had another UK university allowed us to give a UK degree as well. And over time, we moved ourselves into a situation where we were able to get degree awarding powers. So now we're a UK institution in our own right that gives out a British degree. But of course, historically, we're also a US institution that gives out a US degree. So our students do get what we call dual degrees. They get an American degree with an American GPA on it, which is the grade point average that Americans are so important to their structure, with a major and a minor. So very American, but at the same time, you get a UK degree with a UK degree classification, a first, a 2-1 or a 2-2. So it really is a unique institution in that regard. It's a US system with a liberal arts and a credit-based where you take lots of courses across different levels and add them up. But at the same time, we have a British honours outcome, which means that the final 2 years of your degree gets you a British degree in that framework. So people are probably used to either one structure or the other, but at Richmond you do get both. And that is really specific to Richmond. It's really unique, and it's amazing in a way that we were able to do this. As to other questions I get asked a lot, students often ask about the final year dissertation, can they write on whatever they like? And the answer is kind of yes, but.
Yes.
Students can pick any topic they like, but students will often pick topics that are way too broad. They want to write about the entire history of the planet in their dissertations, and it has to kind of be narrowed down to something that's viable. I often get asked about the decolonisation of the curriculum, which is a very common phenomenon, particularly in the United States of America. We've put a lot of effort in that regard, but obviously historically our curriculum has been a lot about decolonisation, post-coloniality, imperialism, because we've always had that international focus with a focus on developing states. So we've always kind of really been interested in issues of structural inequality and why trade benefits rich countries more than it benefits poor countries. So historically, we've been very good on that regard, but we do put a lot of effort into making sure that we cover different parts of the world, that different voices are represented within the curriculum, that we address gender issues in the context of development, and students have been very happy. We've recently held some meetings about decolonisation where we've asked students for their input on what we do, and students have reported that they're very pleased with the way the curriculum has developed. Like you say, they're also very pleased with the way assessment has developed. I think it's because students hate exams. I think that's what that boils down to.
I think it's also really nice that after you graduate, you come out with a portfolio that you can actually show and like some practical skills, whereas like without that, I feel like it's a little bit more difficult to get into actual workplace. So
you are right. I mean,
I
again,
appreciate that as a student.
Part of restructuring is to allow you to have materials that you can take into a job interview situation.
Yes.
You can't turn up to a job interview with your final exam and say, look what I did, because no one's going to be impressed. But with the policy evaluation document that we do in sustainable development, with the policy briefs, with the other policy writing exercises we do, with the campaign materials that we do in human rights and security studies, students have got a bunch of material that is reminiscent of the kinds of things people do in the workplace. So it makes sense to employers in a job interview situation. So we've worked really hard to allow students to have a portfolio of work that they can take away with them. We really want to make sure that students have the ability to go into jobs with transferable skills, a range of different jobs, at the same time as making sure that students can get into these top master's programs, but also to excel in those programs. So it's kind of a dual objective that we try to deliver there. So Maja, tell us what you enjoy about your international relations degree.
I really like how the degree is structured. I really appreciate that. I feel like each year prepares you very well for the next year, so you're not like completely overwhelmed. Also, I feel like I've learned a lot about politics, international relations, and economics, and it all just like gives this. I feel like the way I perceive the world just like expanded. It's like I feel more confident and more compassionate and more understanding. I feel like it just made me. I don't know. It's just really great to know a lot of things. And I also really like the classes that are not too big. Again, it's just not that overwhelming. And the fact that I can schedule meetings with my professor and then even get feedback on my work, it's really great. And then I feel like I learn more in that way.
The external examiners also always comment on the extent of the feedback we provide students on their work.
Yes.
It's a lot more than what you'd get at a normal UK or US institution.
It's like you pay maybe similar amount for the degree, but you get way more professional feedback.
And what was your favourite classes?
I really like the diplomatic studies. I really like doing the Twitter assessment. It was, again, kind of practical and very interesting to see how digital world influence diplomacy. I'm doing also a minor in digital studies, so the fact that like I can also like put these two together in one class was really great.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
And what's your dissertation going to be on? Do you know?
I am not exactly sure the specific topic, but I would like to write about cyber warfare.
Wow,
Definitely,
great.
yeah.
And obviously students, they have such a range of areas that they cover in the degree. We get an incredible range of dissertations from cyber warfare to, on the ground development aid in sub-Saharan Africa. It covers the entire spectrum basically.
Yes, and I think that really is reflected in the degree, that the broadness of it and the freedom that you have in it, and writing what you want to write about, not like just you have to write about this and there you go. No, you can actually choose what you're interested in, so it makes it easier actually to learn.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you find this useful, and if you have any questions, our contact details are right here.